Welcome, everybody. I'm Margot Frank. I'm part of the National Leadership Team for Elders Climate Action and have had the pleasure of working this year with Jen Chandler, our Director of Operations, and Nico Brown, who is our Membership and Chapter Coordinator, and to plan these series of Better Together sessions. And some of you may be here for the first time, and some of you maybe have watched the other ones after the fact, the recordings of them, or been here for them. So we welcome all of you. Um, you know, we're not here as the experts to tell you how this all works and what to do, but we're here to provide a safe space and forum for conversation to figure this out together. What does it mean? What does climate equity and justice mean? And today, what does accountability in climate action, climate equity, and climate justice mean? So, um, we really encourage all of you to participate in the conversations. You'll be in breakout rooms for 20 minutes, about halfway through. And there's lots and lots of opportunities, and we really encourage you to share as much as you can in the chat box also. So welcome. And I want to just remind you all of the questions that we encouraged you to grapple with in the past month since our last session. The first one was, how can we have justice if things are inequitable? And then, are there barriers to centering justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in your climate work? And if so, what are they? We know that if there's a barrier to doing something, unless you name that barrier and figure out how to address it, you get stuck. And then how might you address those barriers that you've recognized? And also, it's really important for us to know what kinds of help you might need to address these barriers, and if that's help that ECA can provide to you or not. And then how do we work together to change systems and policies to be more just and equitable? So if any of you thought about or had conversations grappling with any of these questions in the past month, I want to encourage you at any point to just share some of that in the chat box for everyone to see. And there can be a conversation there while we're also engaged in our session today focused on accountability. I'm going to turn it over to Nico now, who's going to start us off with really looking at this question of accountability.
All right. Thank you, Miss Margot. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Ernico Brown, and I really just want to welcome you all. And prior to me getting started, I really want you all to be at liberty to really lean into the information that we're providing today, simply because this topic is very important to the work that we all do. And it's not just important to the work, it's important to our lives and our livelihoods. So I definitely encourage everyone to really lean in, dig deep, and really take time to think about things and really work with us in creating a conversation that will be beneficial to us all. And with that being said, why is it important to have conversations about accountability? And feel free to respond in the chat. And as everybody is taking time to um, really think through this question, for me, it's important again because accountability deals with our lives, our livelihoods, our families, our everyday living. And it's just super important to have people held accountable in everything that they do. Okay. Thank you, everybody. A couple of the responses. Miss Kimberly says to better understand each other and to be equal fitting, to be on equal fitting. Okay. Miss Leslie, important to discuss accountability because we need to know what we are looking for, what is the measure, what is being measured. That's really good. Ms. Nancy, to make sure that our actions are allied with shared values and mission. Thank you. And Ms. Kathy, accountability holds feet to the proverbial fire. Just need to make sure the measures for accountability are equitable. All of those are fantastic responses, and I definitely appreciate you all for participating. And if I did not read yours out, it's okay, because guess what? We got another question. And so with this one, what does it mean to have accountability in relationships? And we thought through this question, and that is family, organizations, work relationships, just any relationship that you feel is important. You can reference that relationship when answering this question. And this time I'm gonna read a couple, but I'm gonna also call on a couple people to do their response if that's okay. So if you don't feel like you want to put it in the chat, we definitely can devote a minute, about 30 seconds to each person to just elaborate. So if you want to raise your hand using the raise hand feature, I definitely can call on you. All right, Miss Margot, to own up to ways that I have done harm. Okay. To follow through, Miss Kathy says to follow through, do what you say you're going to do, walk the walk. Right. All of these are, Miss Jerry, always stay in integrity. Great. All of those are great responses, and I do appreciate all of you for sharing in those series of questions. And we're talking about accountability tonight. I wanted to lead with those questions before we actually define what accountability was. So this is the definition from Oxford's dictionary, and it says the quality or state of being accountable, but I like what the next line says, that it's an obligation or a willingness to accept responsibility. Oftentimes in doing this work, we say that we want to hold ourselves accountable, but we don't want to be responsible for the things that happen. So in doing this work, we want to be held accountable as an organization, but we don't want the responsibilities of what's going on in the organization. Example is, like, if we have someone that's not a true representative of the organization, we don't want to hold the responsibility as an organization to do the work to get that person on par with what's going on within the organization, and being aligned to our values and our mission as an organization. And sometimes there is a discrepancy in accountability. So that is one of the reasons that we wanted to bring forth accountability this week. And next slide, Ms. Jen. And Miss Margot.
Okay, thanks, Nico.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
I'm going to, we have on the slide some basic explanations of these 4 pillars of accountability. I think what many of you shared in the chat speaks to this, and I'm going to share a little more of my perspective also on this. So, responsibility is an important pillar in accountability, and it's our duty that binds us to the course of action. And I think of it as when we take responsibility, then when I take responsibility, I'm owning the part that I played in harming, creating harm, causing harm, and taking responsible action to counter or address that harm. And answerability, being called to account. So I know there's a lot of press these days around what's called cancel culture. And I don't think of this as answerability as being the same as that. Um, I think of it as, when someone names the harm that I have caused, then I answer to that being called on that, and without being defensive, to respond responsive respectfully, and to hear the truth in whatever's being said. Trustworthiness is really so essential in all our relationships, whether it's with our allies or with people that whose feet we're holding to the fire. Um, and trustworthiness is really acting in a way that garners trust, that you not only talk the talk, but you walk the walk, being predictably responsible, respectful, and really honoring the sanctity of the relationship. Um, and then liability is not just, certainly there's the legal definition of liability and being bound to repay a debt or obligation, but it's also, I think of it as really accepting your responsibility and making restitution as needed to repay the debt or obligation. And we're going to go back to Nico now, who's going to help us look at how can climate justice be accountable for human justice. Do we have Nico? Have we lost her somehow, Jen?
She's here. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So the question is, in what ways can those responsible be held accountable for climate justice? And what I really want to do is open up the floor and really ask everyone to lean in. And you don't have to put anything in the chat, but I would like to hear from at least two people and their perspective on this question. So if anybody feels led to answer this, please feel free to raise your hand or come off mute to answer this. Miss Nancy?
Well, I think of the group that I'm working with here in Northwest Indiana. We're working on removal of coal ash from a power plant site that's being retired. And the community immediately around the power plant is a low income, largely by people of color community. And so the utility just wants to cap in place. They don't want to remove the coal ash. And so that will leave that ground contaminated and leaching into the groundwater and into the soil of that community. So it's not only a case of climate justice, it's also a case of racial justice as well. And I think you find that a lot.
Right. Thank you, Miss Kimberly, for putting in the chat. Would you like to elaborate on what you're saying in the chat? While she's deciding, is there anyone else who would like to speak?
It looks like Gwen has her hand up.
Miss Gwen.
Hello, my name is Gwen, and I actually live in a low-income neighborhood in Massachusetts, in Western Mass. And we're having a situation where our community food justice garden was just demolished, half of it, without any kind of notification or warning. And so, you know, it's a real problem. It's a real problem because some people grow food because it is their culture, and they grow their own medicine because that is their culture and that's the way that they grew up. And so, you know, some people have never lived any other way, you know. So, and then there's also like everything else that we weren't expecting, like, you know, losing our half of our garden and our food. And so how could they be held accountable is I think that they have to be willing to be seen, you know. And I think that um one way that I know that we are holding them accountable is we're bringing it to the board, and there's been a slideshow, and there's you know, a whole telling of it from the beginning until it became um, damaged, which on the day that it was damaged, it was during the Jewish holiday, the harvest season of Sukkot, and also it was the first day of autumn. So, you know, it just felt really pretty racist. And so, you know, calling them out and doing it in a way that they're going to be seen is one way that I think is important, because there's no, if you can let them sort of squeeze around all the little bylaws and be making excuses, or, you know, be saying that it was a business decision and this and that, they then might continue to get away with it systemically. But I really just feel like accountability is important. And the only way to do that really is to make it out there, just put it out there. You know, this is what happened and this is the truth. And it's an unfortunate truth, and it's uncomfortable for everybody to talk about. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Miss Gwen. And Miss Leslie, I see your hand right before you give your comment. I really want to say, Miss Gwen, I definitely understand what you're saying when you said that people grow food as a part of their culture. I am 34, and for 34 years, my family has had a garden that's been an acre. So I've never, when people talk about sustainability, that's been for my family the way that we've survived and fed people in the community for all of my life. So yeah, I really wanted to raise that point and let you know that I identify with you when you say that. And Miss Leslie?
Yes. You know, I guess I read this question as those of us who are climate activists, when there has to be a lot of change if we are going to keep climate change from going over and basically destroying our world. And we need to make that change with human justice in mind, so that those whose lives are affected negatively by the changes in the industries or the technologies, they benefit, they get the jobs, they get the training. Those who have been, you know, as was said, who have been in frontline communities impacted negatively health-wise by polluting fossil fuel companies, that they are given the opportunities as we shut those polluting factories down, that they are given the opportunities to rise up and beyond, so that we're bringing huge transformation to the world. And we need to do it elevating all of those who will be affected by the changes or who have been impacted by the fossil fuel. So that's my understanding.
Thank you for sharing that. Ms. Jen, if you could share the next slide, and I really appreciate everybody really leaning into that question. So accountability as it relates to climate change, and this really feeds off of what you just said, Ms. Leslie. As activists, it is our responsibility to be held accountable for what's going on. Like, we all know that that trees are being cut down. Well, what can we do about the trees? We all know that there's flooding, like Ms. Gwen just put in the chat about the wetlands. We all know that these things are going on, and we have an opportunity to hold ourselves accountable. And in order for us to have true accountability in doing the work, we have to participate in the work. Rather than being a bystander of circumstance, we have to actually get in the fight and, roll up our sleeves and dig in. We have to be transparent about what's going on. And it's like, oh, well, this is happening. No, this is happening. And when I say transparent being specific to communities, this is happening like Miss Nancy said, predominantly Black and BIPOC communities, leading with that in mind and saying that this is going on, actually leaning into what's going on and what's happening, and evaluating that process by saying, this is not right. And this isn't right because this is going on. And really lean in and support those communities, those frontline members, like Ms. Leslie was saying, those complaints, like raising those complaints, like Ms. Gwen was saying, going to the boards and stuff, really talking about this, really raising the issue rather than being a bystander of circumstance. Hold yourself accountable, because when one person hurts, we all hurt. And what our Pledge of Allegiance says at the end is, with liberty and justice for all. And if one person is dealing with something, we're all dealing with it. If one person is dealing with climate change, it doesn't pick a neighborhood and skip over another neighborhood. This goes across the entire gamut. So we're all affected and we're all impacted by these injustices. So I encourage everybody to, as you look at this slide, remember that in order for you to have, in order for accountability to actually work, you have to participate, be transparent, evaluate, and respond to the complaints and stuff, and making sure people are held accountable in the work that is going on. Ms. Jen, if you could do the next slide. So what is accountability in climate change, and why is it important? So accountability in climate change is basically what I just said. We all are impacted. It doesn't matter if you're over in Washington State, Washington, D.C., South Carolina, North Carolina, out in the Midwest, we're all impacted. And the thing that we need to see are the injustices and how we bring about the injustices to justice, the inequalities, and how we bring about equitable standards of living for each and every person, whether it be racial disparities. How do we lean in to give people an equal playing field, give people an equal chance? Because the basis of it is respect and dignity for all people, not just one set race, one set of people, one demographic, but all people. It's just as important to have climate change, or it's just as important to have climate justice and climate change for the elderly as it is for the children. It's just as important to have the equitable standards for Black people as it is for white people, as it is for Latinx people. All of it is important. We should see each other as equals in this work and in the justices that we want to bring about. It's not just for my family or your family, it's for all families. And if one family is going through something, then we're all going through something. And the accountability piece needs to come in, because we work a lot of times in silos. We do a lot of things and we function in a capacity where if it's beneficial to me, then I'll do it. But what we don't do is take time to empathize with this community, because they lack access, they lack opportunity, they lack equitable standards. We overlook them because it doesn't affect us. And we don't look at things until we are closely impacted. So this is why accountability in climate change is important. The next thing we're going to talk about, and I'm going to pass it over to Ms. Jen, is about examples of accountability in climate action.
So one of the things that I think is important to address also is that it's not just about our personal accountability, but it's really about holding those most responsible for the climate crisis accountable. And so a few great examples of accountability. We can see some examples at a local level, but we can also see some examples at a larger national and global level. The Drax wood pellet industry is a great example. They were recently fined $2.5 million for polluting an underserved community in Gloucester, Mississippi. Happens to be a community that our Miss Nico Brown actually works in, and so she has personal connections and ties to this particular issue. But the wood pellet industry is really devastating the South. And if you don't know much about the wood pellet industry, I really encourage you to go and learn more about it. You can go to Dogwood Alliance website and learn a lot about what the effects and impacts are of the wood pellet industry, specifically on the Southeast. And aside from clear cutting forests, which we all know is not something we need to be doing in this moment in a climate crisis, these wood pellet plants are serious polluters within these communities that tend to be rural and BIPOC communities. Another great example of holding those accountable in climate action is the efforts of Our Children's Trust, which is the Juliana versus the United States lawsuit, among many other lawsuits that have now been filed across the United States as well as globally. There's a number of lawsuits that youth have filed against their countries in a number of other countries outside of the US, and then state lawsuits by youth here in the US. And so that's a great example of youth really leading a charge to hold governments accountable and demand that climate justice is a constitutional right. So if you're not familiar with the work of Our Children's Trust, please go learn more about Our Children's Trust on their website. And one of the things that's coming up here very soon on October 29th, and something that we're very that's very meaningful to us, we've been working as a partner in the Youth Climate Strike Coalition, which has now become the Youth Climate Finance Alliance. We've been a movement partner since 2019 with the youth, and they're planning a fossil-free future day of action on October 29th. These will be mobilized actions across the United States. Right now, there's about 15 different actions scheduled against Chase Bank, JP Morgan Chase, BlackRock, and the Federal Reserve. JP Morgan Chase and BlackRock. JP Morgan Chase is the largest funder of fossil fuels, closely followed by BlackRock. And so really targeting the financial sector and trying to really stop the money pipeline going into all these fossil fuel projects. And so I'd like to share a video that the youth have made in the ways that they are working to hold Chase Bank accountable for their actions. Oh, and you know what? I just realized I forgot to set the video settings. So let me stop share real quick and reshare. My apologies.
We are in crisis.
Climate change is a critical issue of our time.
So why is JP Morgan Chase funneling hundreds of billions into catastrophic fossil fuel projects? Last year, the climate justice movement put big banks on notice and won. Frontline communities saved Alaska's wildlife by taking on banks and ending the expansion of fossil fuels. We are the rising generation, and we can win if we follow the money. That's why we are declaring that we will not be opening bank accounts or working with JP Morgan Chase until they stop funding fossil fuels for good. And mark your calendars, because on October 29th, we are organizing a worldwide mobilization for a fossil-free future.
So keep your eyes out. We will be sending more information about the fossil-free future day of action in our next action alert. We sent one out last week as well with some information about the upcoming events. Yeah, so Margot, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jen. That video is so inspiring, fires me up. So this accountability ladder, I want to say that, Gwen, your example that you shared about what was happening with the garden and how your community is responding, is a wonderful example of this. Oh, we've got something, that black box, if you can make it go away, Jen. Um, so, um, things happen because of you, because of your actions. Well, people say, I didn't know. And certainly, I didn't know for years that the way I was living was going to lead to this climate disaster, blaming others. Well, even in my own life, it's easy for me to blame government and big corporations and not take responsibility for my part in it. Excuses, as Gwen was saying about, the excuses that the people who destroyed the garden have of, well, it's financial, whatever. Now, her group could just wait and hope that things would get better, but that doesn't really result in change. So the key is to acknowledge the reality of what's happening, for those who are doing harm to acknowledge it and own their part in it, to be part of finding solutions, not just leaving the solutions to, not coming up with solutions that just come from the perspective of those who are doing the damage and are responsible for it, or just from those who are damaged, but for those responsible to really listen to those who've been harmed and to incorporate and follow their lead. And then to make it happen, to take action. And, we're Elders Climate Action. We are about action. So we're going to, in a few minutes here, pretty soon, we're going to send you into breakout rooms. Jen is getting those set up, and you're going to have some small group conversations for about 20 minutes. And Jen, if you're able to bring up the slide with the questions on it, and they'll also be in the chat box. So once you're in your breakout rooms, you'll be able to look at them. And I'm just going to go over what the questions are for you to work with, and whether you focus on one or you're able to get to all of them, we'll see. So first of all, how can you hold yourself accountable when doing climate justice work? Second, what could accountability look like in our work? And what steps should we take to get there? I think the question of what steps we're going to take are really important, because we can have a vision, but if we don't have a plan to enact that vision and get there, we're not going to make much progress. And then how can we hold our government and corporations accountable for climate justice? And I know that ECA has been sending out lots of reminders of actions to take regarding legislation at the federal level that can really help to address these concerns. So when you're in your breakout rooms, I just want to remind you, you'll have a small group. There won't be, it'll be easy for you to have a conversation and for everyone to be able to participate. Make sure that none of you hog the whole show, but that you leave room and draw out the other people in your group, and that we're not here to argue and disagree, but to listen and engage respectfully. And we're going to have a little bit of time when you all come back from your groups for a minute or less of reporting back on very briefly on anything. And also, when you come back, you can share in the chat things that were talked about, or kind of that you learned or you understand now, you have another new understanding of. Anything that you want to share from your breakout rooms, we'll want to hear from you in person and also in the chat. So if there's one person in each of your rooms who's willing to be the person to report back, that would be great. And for that reporter to be succinct and just share very briefly kind of bullet points or one thing in particular that's a takeaway from your group. So Jen, are we getting close? Some people I see need to leave. I'm sorry if you need to leave. You will be able to hear the reporting back on the recording of this session that you'll all get. but we hope that many of you can stay and engage in these conversations. This is really the chance for a little bit of a deep dive for you to bounce off of then in considering questions over the coming month.
Okay, well, I'm
Okay.
about to open the rooms. All you
Great.
need to do is just accept the invitation to join the room.
So, Lloyd or whoever was in the room with you, do one of you want to report back? We've got about a minute to do that.
Well, I was in the room with Kathy, so why don't we go? Kathy, you want to start and then I'll fill it in?
Well, we talked about holding climate justice in the forefront, that's got to be an integral piece of anything that we do for climate change. Because if we don't keep our climate justice, then it's not going to be, and the world that we go to after we go through whatever we're going to go through won't be worth living in anyway. So how, and that we have to think about climate justice and social justice in everything that we do, what we buy, what we do, how we spend our money, how we vote. It's got to be a factor in all parts of our life.
Great, thank you. Anything you wanted to add to that, Lori?
I think we also yeah, that was great. And then also how to hold government and corporations accountable. I guess for me it's I'm not sure how we can, because there's an old saying of he who has the gold makes the rules. And right now it's the fossil fuel industry and the like, the extractive industries that are making the rules because they have the gold. So I don't know what it's going to take to have those who have the gold, who are socially responsible enough to want to use it to make a difference. So that's just disheartening for me.
So that's a barrier you talked about.
That's a huge barrier,
yeah.
And I don't know
Okay.
the answer.
Well, thank you. Okay, let's see. Nancy, someone from the group you were in want to report back?
That was Mark. Mark volunteered to report.
Okay, Mark, you want to go for it?
Sure. Give me a minute to get my notes up here. So regarding the first question, I think there was a consensus among all of us that we are doing our parts on a sort of an individual basis. And in some ways, there's a certain amount of privilege because two of us have solar panels, one of us has an electric car, and the issue of even diet came up, less meat. So we talked a little bit about that. So on the one hand, we feel that there's a lot we can do, a lot we are doing, and at the same time, we feel overwhelmed because we know we're not doing nearly enough. And we basically just said we've got to just kind of sort of put one foot in front of the other, and as we can do more, but you know, it is hard. Regarding the second question, what steps can we get there? I sort of just touched on that, which is just keep looking for ways. I think, you know, I had talked to them about how I'm uncomfortable sort of evangelizing to friends, family, neighbors, that sort of thing. But they certainly know I'm part of Elders Climate Action, and I think just trying to draw people in more. So again, in terms of just doing more, I think that's what it amounts to. We simply just have to keep trying. And then with respect to government corporations, you know, it's just such a big deal, but you know, we're with government, it's voting, of course, the protests we saw in the little video and divestment, those kinds of things are important. Elders Climate Action had a thing on B corporations. It's those are corporations trying to balance profit and purpose. So trying to do more business with them, if possible, invest with them. And then we talked about the upcoming COP26 thing, and that if our government is to have any credibility, then we have to do something when Biden or whoever shows up at that. If we have not made progress in our own country on that, we're going to have no credibility with other countries around the world, and they're not going to feel any motivation to do anything either. So as difficult it is, and it's hugely difficult, we got to find a way to do it. So that's it for our group.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Let's see, Gwen, I don't know who was in your group and who's reporting back, but whoever that is, if you can unmute and share briefly.
Sure, I'm going to have Jerry report back.
Okay.
Sure, we did not get through all of those questions. We were deeply involved in really being our own accountability. We talked about our personal accountability and how we can manage that in ways that we have constraints, and ways that we no longer have any constraints in terms of being retired and having the capacity to really speak what we mean, rather than having to hold back because of outside maybe employment issues that could basically hamper or prevent us from really speaking truth. We talked about holding ourselves accountable to really call out within our groups, our friends, our family, where it's difficult to call out anything that is perhaps a climate injustice or an environmental injustice. So we talked deeply about that, and ways that we can impact local issues. One way impacting, ways to sort of have an impact that it feels a little bit bigger, and that is through providing some financing for down ballot elections, which are important for environmental people and that have environmental strongholds. So to support those kinds of things, to speak to pesticide use and agriculture, and really push those issues in terms of not degrading the soil further, and then hopefully speaking to local officials and impacting them and holding them accountable, even by just a presence in the room, provides accountability at a local level. So I see we're out of time. So that would be.
Thanks, Jerry. Yeah, if there's one group we haven't heard anything from, if there's anything you want to very briefly add, I apologize that we're going over a little bit today. But if Leslie.
I was in group 4, and there are 3 others here on the phone. I think that a couple of things came up. One was in the first one on holding yourself accountable, learning and sharing what you've learned, but also really inviting the voices of others, the voices of those who are underprivileged, who are subject to the inequities of the pollution and the climate change industry, so that there is a hearing and understanding. And when we talk about that one of our members brought up Joanna Macy's book on active hope, and how useful that can be in helping us to deal with the depression and withdrawal of the enormity of the climate crisis, and involves in many ways visualizing yourself. I mean, in a kind of Buddhist style of visualizing yourself. It's not me and them, but we're all in this together. We're part of a network. And so it gets rid of the barriers. And then when it comes to corporations and government accountability for climate justice, I heard a lot about contacting representatives, voting, but doing things like attending press conferences, town halls, board meetings. I mean, all kinds of ways of being there and often being able to speak out. And
great. Thank you so much, Leslie.
In Arizona, there is a corporation commission that has control over corporations and attending their meetings and speaking up, and they've invited people to speak.
Wow, that's great to know about. Thanks.
So it's get out of your
Okay.
comfort zone.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this, being an activist requires us to get out of our comfort zone. And it's always good to learn new things as we get older. So learning to be out of our comfort zone is one way we can do that. Thank you all for hanging in here with us for the whole time today. You'll be getting some questions for reflection in an email. I'm just going to briefly mention them. What can we do as individuals and collectively to hold those responsible accountable for the climate crisis? In what ways have you been responsible as an individual and a member of society for the climate crisis and its impact on frontline vulnerable communities? And how can you, both individually and in the collective, make amends, take actions that offers some kinds of reparations to those most harmed? And if you're doing any actions, especially if you're participating on October 29th, please have somebody take a picture of you. And if you've got an ECA t-shirt, wear a banner, have that with you, and send a picture of that to info@eldersclimateaction.org. We always need pictures of our members taking action. So thank you all for being with us today. We'll hope to see you in a month. We have 2 more of these sessions left. And may you have a good month of thoughtful discussion and grappling with these questions and taking good action.
Will you be emailing those questions to us?
Yes, yes, you'll be good.
We'll send a recording of a copy of the recording, as well as the questions and a list of resources to sort of continue your thinking about accountability. So we'll send that out sometime tomorrow.
And before everybody leaves, our next one is called Unity in Community. So I invite and I encourage you to bring someone with you, and we're going to have an open, honest discussion about community and how we can bring about unity in our communities to do the work on behalf of climate action. See you guys next month, and thank you for joining us.